Our fifth or sixth year?
I believe it's our 6th year.
This is our 6th year.
Yeah, that's what I think.
So this is our 6th year, brought to you by Legendary Marine and Half Hitch Tackle. And this is our saltwater seminar series. And like I said, we have a special guest tonight, Mr. Mark Holtz, 30A light tackle out in Grayton Beach, and Mr. Tim Broom, Vice President of Half Hitch Tackle. And because I don't know a whole lot about inshore fishing, I'm going to let you guys start.
Okay, so I'm going to start about triggerfish. Who caught their limit today? Really? We were done at like 8:30.
Did you really?
No.
What did you do today?
Almost nothing. I tried to print handouts for y'all to have tonight, and that didn't work out very well because the printer said no. But no, I didn't do anything today.
What did you do this morning, Mark?
About as much as Tim, except for I didn't try to print out anything.
But I have been preparing a lot over the last several weeks. I've done a lot.
So,
I've painted leads, I've rigged tackle, I've done maintenance on rods and reels, all the things that we need to do to be ready. So when fishing season does get here, then I don't have to deal with any of that anymore.
I agree. I've been working on the boat almost nonstop just to make sure that when it is go time, like it might be next week or Thursday even, just to make sure there's not any issue at all.
so we're going to switch mics. People need to hear you a lot more than they need to hear me.
How about that?
Is that better? Can y'all hear him?
Hi.
Talk louder, Mark.
Pretend
I can do that.
Talk with the tone that we had at the Skid Row concert a couple of years ago.
I'll lose my voice in about 5 minutes if we.
All right, before we get into the inshore thing, and for us, this inshore seminar is more about shallow water fishing than it is bay fishing in the fall, because there's a lot of big bull red schooled up, and you're chasing birds, and you're doing stuff in deeper water, you're fishing deeper pilings, the sheep's head fishing and all that good stuff. Well, that kind of goes away in middle of March and all the way through the spring. As it gets warmer and warmer and warmer, we're strictly inshore. But it's not inshore, but it is near shore. And this one thing that we fail to talk about a lot in this specific class is the pompano fishing. And I just have a real weird gut feeling that this is going to be the best pompano season of all time.
So I think as far as the pompano go, I do think it's going to be a good year for those. There's some early signs right now. We had, they used to at the pier, they still do, they give a pass for the first pompano. And people have found out they can go to the pier and catch one pretty much on January 1st or 2nd because those are leftover fish from the year before. And then if we kind of seem like we have, the last few years, we've had some warmer than normal winters per se, and the pompano have kind of stayed, some have always been here in January and February. Well, for the last, 3 weeks, they've been almost non-existent, which is actually a good thing. That means the water temperature is getting down where it needs to be. And it will make not only things like pompano fishing better, but cobias and king mackerels and everything else when the water temperature does get down some. I actually went this past week, I went pompano fishing twice. I went on Wednesday. I did not catch a surf fish of any kind. Although you're talking about your sharks on the flats, the only fish I hooked the first day was a shark about this big. He was swimming down the beach, and I grabbed my little pompano jig rod, which is about like what we would use for trout fishing, something like this. Had a pompano jig on it, took the biggest shrimp I had, put it on there, threw out. He immediately ate that, and he ran off about 3 feet of line, bit my jig off. And I went back on Thursday, caught 2 whiting and 1 pompano that day. And then on one of the local forums, the Panhandle Surf Fishing Forum, I put a post on there Saturday because I knew a lot of people had gone pompano fishing, and probably out of 50 people that went, only 2 or 3 actually caught one on Saturday, which to me that's a good sign, because that will mean when the fishing does get here, it will have this nice little ramp up. And the years when it gets cold are the best years for pompano, king mackerel, and cobia fishing.
Now, you can make fun of me for this, but I write down almost every fish that I catch in a spreadsheet. And I was looking at it today to see, like, hey, if I was going fishing tomorrow, what would I do? And we started catching pompano off the beach. Great keeper-sized pompano about St. Patrick's Day last year. March 14th was really when it started for us.
Yeah, and Mark and Kayla live in Drayton Beach, and they live about 2 of these showrooms in distance from the water. And what Mark's a northerner. He came down here. He just fell in love with it. He's an outdoorsman. He loves to ski. Loves to do all kinds of outdoor activities. Plays hockey, football, all that good stuff. But he just really fell in love with fishing. And he has. And before we leave tonight, I'll go in my office and I'll get the contraption that you guys invented on how to make your own pompano rigs very easily, but very professional. And it's super cool. So
It's the same rig we use for bottom fishing, for triggers, and even snappers.
is there a name for that?
It's a 2-hook dropper loop
Okay.
is the rig.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the board that he's made
Yeah.
with all the nail heads on it? Mm-hmm. It's really cool.
Yeah, they have there's lots of tutorials on YouTube how to make those. And Mark said something that was really important that if y'all didn't catch what he said, it's something that my grandfather ingrained into me when I was little bitty. And Mark said he writes down everything that he catches in a little spreadsheet. Well, I have spiral notebooks at home. And in those spiral notebooks, there's like 1978, 1979, and all the years. And I write down, every time I go fishing, I write it down. And I have the date, what the weather was, what the water conditions were, where I fished, how I fished. We had a great day or we had a terrible day. Well, now I can go back and look 4 or 5 years back. If I'm going, doesn't matter what kind of fishing I'm going to do, this will work whether you're inshore fishing or marlin fishing. You go back 4 or 5 years and you start looking for days. You look at what the weather forecast is going to be and what the weather forecast, what if you can find days similar to that you fished. And hey, I fished southeast, we caught nothing. We fished southwest on this weather pattern and we crushed them. Now you have a good idea of which way to go. It takes you several years to build that log up to have that info, but it's invaluable info if you'll log everything. And it works the same thing for hunting.
And yeah, Todd was right. Like when I moved down here, I didn't know how to fish Florida, and I just figured, like with the way I went to school and what I did for a job before I moved down here, I was like, there's got to be a pattern to some of this. There's got to be some kind of reason why fish act a certain way at a certain time. And now, a couple years later, I mean, Tim's right. If it gives me a much better idea in the morning on what I want to try to do, because fishing's fishing. You don't know how it's going to go. I mean, look at bass fishermen. You could do the same thing every day, and some days it works and some days it doesn't. So just trying to find some kind of pattern to be a little more successful.
So back in your day, they had spiral notebooks. Now they have Facebook.
I know.
So you can just scroll back to last year's photos and be like, oh, on this day.
Although be careful with Facebook, because a lot of the stuff you see on Facebook isn't entirely accurate.
That's true.
Well, I have people post pictures of fish we caught on my boat.
Yep.
So
we want to get started and talk a little inshore. So that's redfish and trout and some sheep's head still. How is the sheep's head bite right now at the jetties? Is it still going off?
It actually hasn't gotten good yet at the jetties. It's been mostly, everything that I've seen has really been in the bay. The next full moon, which we just came off of a full moon, the next full moon will be the time when the sheephead are really, really thick at the jetties. But it's going to be so late that they're going to be all mixed in with a ton of pompano. So you have your choice that day to catch.
which, I mean, either way, it's not bad.
No,
The pompano fishing in the past is a lot of fun, isn't it?
it's just so easy. You can pull up the 3 days before and after the full moon. You can fish all along the east or west jetty, inside and outside. You can take sand fleas, you can take live shrimp or pompano jigs. I've seen pictures of some of the guys I know that commercial fish here. It's not uncommon for them to catch 200 in a day. And don't get out there, if you plan to fish the little finger jetty, which is the best place to do that little stuff, that pompano fishing, don't think you're gonna go there at 7 o'clock and get a spot. You know, that's a little bitty place. At sun up, there's gonna be 4 boats sitting there. Get there early.
Yep, and don't go and just think that you can use traditional equipment and just catch them all. Alphonse and I went last year, and I told him, man, I've been living here for almost 20 years, and I've always wanted to fish the finger jetty. So we went and bought jigs and some heavier pompano jigs that we thought would get down, because I know the drop off pretty well. I fished it for reds when I first moved here, and we sat beside the A team and watched them catch 50 fish, and we caught 1, and we're flipping in the same exact spot. And it was just the difference of weight. It was the difference. I mean, we were fishing super light fluorocarbon leaders. I went from a 3-foot leader to a 7-foot leader just to make sure that's not what they were seeing, but it's about the weight, it's about the color sometimes. But then there's days where you can go and everything you drop in the water, they're going to eat. There are tens of thousands of pompano in that pass in the next month.
And that pass fishing thing is I say full moon, it's actually neap tides that you want to watch for. It's the day that there's 2 days that the tides will neap. And I don't know if y'all know what neap tides are. On the Gulf Coast, we have 2 tides a day. Same thing in the Mediterranean. We're the only 2 places in the world that have only 2 tides. Everybody else has 4. It's because of our length of east-west coastline. So that when the tides flip twice a month, we have 4 tides a day. That's called neap tides here. And it'll last for 2 days. And you get those 2 days and the 2 days on either side of that. So, but the full moon coincides with one of the neap tide days. So that's the days. The rest of the time, they're going to be all scattered along the beaches. On the neap tide days, you don't need to go down and fish like Drayton Beach or Henderson Park. You're not catching anything pompano fishing. They're all going to be at the jetties. I don't know why they do it, but I know they do it.
So while we're on the pompano thing, I know we're supposed to be talking redfish and trout and all that good stuff. Do you guys like to pompano fish? Anybody here? You don't necessarily have to have a boat to pompano fish, right? It's a lot easier to do it from the beach. And you guys have some very special jigs. I mean, you've been here forever pompano fishing, and you've got it down to a science. Is it easy to say that you could catch 4 to 5 fish in an hour if you were jig fishing?
Yes.
So what do you look for when you're jig fishing as opposed to live bait fishing?
So you're going to fish where the rip currents go back out, the little pockets. You're going to have a sandbar and a sandbar, and these waves will come up and crash onto the beach, and they'll meet back together and rush out. That's what creates a rip current. That rip current also creates a pocket. So if you're just going to blind cast, you're going to blind cast in the pockets. On the days that the conditions are right, when you want to walk along, there's a lot of days that I'll go and I'll start down there at the El Matador condominium and walk way down into the reservation, just spot casting as I go down and looking for fish. Which that's kind of like you like to do with the trout and the redfish on the flats. That's how I like to catch the pompano. It is different though, because you're seeing them from the beach, and you got to remember, you're not actually, if you're trying to spot cast pompano, we got some pictures at the shop if y'all want to come by and look at that. But you're really, when you're like in a boat fishing the flats for redfish, you're seeing the fish. But when you're pompano fishing on the beach, you're not seeing the fish, you're seeing his shadow. So you got to remember where the sun is. So if the sun's here and you're seeing the shadow of the fish here, the fish is about 6 feet that way. Same thing as the sun's over here and the fish is going this way, you got to make sure you lead him enough, because you're seeing the shadow out in front of where the fish is going, not the actual fish.
But I mean, you're absolutely right talking about that rip current, and it's hard. It was hard for me to tell when I moved down here. So I took a mask and snorkel and I swam from like Blue Mountain Beach to Seaside just to see what I could find, and it may only be 6 inches. I mean, that rip could be super small, And it helped me a lot, especially if there was a little north wind around lunchtime, to go out there when that water was just flat calm, to see a little tiny bit of a shadow, so that the next time I went out surf fishing, I could really see, like, hey, there's some water moving through here. That's where I'm going to throw my stuff.
You talk about them little bitty depressions. That's the same way y'all catch a lot of y'all's trout up on the north side, isn't it?
Yeah, so we this time of year, you've got low water conditions, and typically you have very clear water conditions. And so now we'll kind of go into trout fishing as opposed to red fishing. But this time of year, you'll find some random pairs. You'll find some singles. You'll find big bulls on the flat, not 30-pounders, but 11 to 18-pounders. And, my brother and I, this time of year, have been out throwing spinner baits. Like, my favorite bait to throw for a redfish, not trout, but a redfish in March is a spinner bait. Here, I don't know what it is about a spinner bait, but they very rarely mishit them. They hammer them this time of year, and it's a quick bait that you can cover a lot of ground on, and we'll go into some of those in a minute. But back to what Tim just said, when you're trout fishing on the flats, so if you don't have a boat, you're wade fishing, and if you do have a boat, you're in a boat something similar to this 243 Everglades. You're fishing in a couple foot of water, and you're looking for darker little depressions, whether they're, if you get on these flats and you head to the east, you'll notice that these depressions are they're just like ditches, and they always run towards 4 Mile Point. So you take Sandusky and go 4 miles that way, there's a point over there. You'll see these dark spots. And this time of year, there's not a ton of grass like there is in the summer. A lot of it died off and flushed out, but you find those dark spots. One of my favorite places to fish is somewhere very close to here, and there's about a 50-foot dark spot. It's just a little darker than the normal flat, and it's all sand. There's no grass around it at all. And if you have never been there before, you'll be up on the front of your boat, you'll be drifting along or have your trolling motor in the water, and then all of a sudden you're looking down and there's 5 and 6 pound trout everywhere. They just live in this hole every winter. And I don't know if it's because they ambush fish or it's because the hole's darker and it gets more sunlight because of the color, but those are the kind of spots that you find. And what's super frustrating about winter fishing, but tends to change in the spring, is all of these fish that you can see them clear as far as I am to the young man back there in the green shirt. You can stand on the front of a boat and you're like, oh my God, that's a trout. I can see the silhouette of the fish. It's not a redfish. And there's 2 10-pound reds right behind him. 2 months ago, if you see those fish and you're throwing artificials, you're done. Because the second that bait hits the water, even if you pitch it 30 feet this way and wait for them to come, they've already seen that bait hit the water. They've already seen you. And it's just really tough. But this is the time of year where they really start to pounce. They're warming up, and it's a much better fishery. Any flats fishing for you?
The one thing, I just keep looking at this boat. I think about mine and the charters that I run. The thing that I love the most is my power pole when I'm fishing like that, because selfishly, and probably from a comfort perspective for everybody fishing on my boat, once I drop my power pole, if we're using my trolling motor, we'll obviously orient into the direction of the water movement, and everybody kind of ends up fishing off the back because their corks, whatever they're throwing, if it's a Carolina rig, it might hold a little bit better, but everything's going to be fishing off the back. When I get a chance to drop my power pole, it puts everybody up front. And like Todd was saying, he likes to fish off the front, and whether or not you have a tower and you can see things, I think it helps a lot of people to fish off the front. And depending on what you're throwing, you throw it an awful long way off the front.
So, like what Mark was saying, there's a couple of very important tools when you're flats fishing, especially this time of year when the fish are still a little spooky, to really be able to work an area. One is the trolling motor. This day and age, they're all mostly remote control. It took me forever to finally switch over from the tiller style, because I used to love just to tap it, hold it on my hip, and just work it old school. And then finally, rather than putting the remote on my neck, I always hook it to a belt loop or the drawstring on my board shorts, because just after a couple hours, that's a heavy remote, and it's around my neck, and it gets hot.
For me, if I wear it around my neck, when I lean over the side of that, but like we finally get somewhere good that I like to fish, if I have that thing around my neck, and I don't even realize it most of the time, if I'm leaning over to revive a fish and let it go, I can't tell you how many times I lean into something with that here. Next thing I know, I look up and we're a half mile away, and I'm wondering why we're not catching any fish. So that happens a lot when I wear that.
And the power pole, what Mark said is this time of year you're typically dealing with some wind, so you're normally fishing with the wind as opposed to against it, because if you're working against the wind, you've got a trolling motor in the water, you're making a bunch of noise, okay? Plus you have hole slap. You have the water hitting up underneath the chine here, and it's creating kind of an air pocket right here, and it's called hole slap. So normally we're fishing with the wind, we're fishing with the conditions, but when you find fish, the absolute best thing you can do is just tap that power pole switch, and then you drop that. Is everybody familiar with what a power pole is? If you're not, buy one for me tonight on this boat specifically.
If I didn't have one, I would, because especially when we're fishing and I think I have an 8-foot, maybe a 10-foot, I use that to control my drift a lot, because you said trout and redfish this time of year can be super spooky. I'll use that to control my drift a lot.
So I tell people this all the time. If I had a choice between a trolling motor and a power pole, I would rather have a power pole. And my brother's fished out of the same 14-foot stump knocker since 99, 2000. And he still doesn't have a trolling motor, mostly because he's hard-headed as hell, and whatever you tell him to do, he does the opposite. So I planted in his head one day, you have to have a trolling motor, Travis, so he refuses to buy one because I suggested it. But you know what he does is he stops. He has a pole that he can stick in the sand real quick and stop his boat. And so Power Pole also makes some handheld poles. They make a 6-footer and they make an 8.5-footer, and it's very simple. You just literally press it down in the sand and you tie it off to a cleat, and that will stop your boat from drifting. It's just as quiet, because throwing an anchor out with a chain and a rope is obviously not what you want when you're on the flats.
So I grabbed you one because I thought they were still sitting up there. There was a display of them up there.
We sold them all.
There you go.
That's how good they are. So let's talk about actually fishing. With a show of hands, how many people here have a boat? How many people do not have a boat and are fishing from land and are fishing for, okay, so we won't talk about weight fishing. We will talk about gear real quick. A long time ago, a guy finally got me off of big Ambassador reels and 20-pound Andy monofilament and said, Todd, please God, try this rod and reel. So I took a spinning rod that had 15-pound braid and threw it literally 2 times further than I would have if I was throwing my Ambassador 5500C with 20-pound Andy. So it was that day that we caught 6 cobia by 10:30 and had a show that we finished in 4 hours as opposed to 4 days, and we had a blast for the next 3.5 days. But I want to start with the gear. So you guys have heard me talk about this multiple times. These are the 2 brands that I'm the biggest fan of. So in terms of reel, Shimano, and in terms of inshore casting or spinning rods, Star rods. Okay? The Star Segis rod is pound for pound the nicest, it's still pricey to some, but most inexpensive for what you get rod, period. What makes it really good is the strength. I've had 4 of them now over the last 6 years. I've never even come close to breaking one. But about that long ago, they started to introduce these new K guides. Do you see the guides that run down the rod? A lot different than your traditional ugly stick guides. These are angled. They don't have 2 parts to a base. They're not flat. And the purpose of this guide is so that your braid or your line runs through the guides in a aerodynamic pattern to where the line leaves the same speed as the reel. You know what causes wind knots? Is when the line is coming off the reel faster than it can go through these guides. How awesome are these guides?
You know, that was there's been a few things that have revolutionized fishing. You know, first off, it was one of the first things was braid. The second thing, that these are changes in the last 20 years that really changed the way we fish. Berkeley introduced gulp, which now we have many varieties of scented baits, and fluorocarbon. And then about 5 years ago, Fuji, which is the major manufacturer of guides, introduced K-guides. And so those are the four things that have kind of been in the last 20 years have kind of changed and revolutionized fishing. And also in the rods, this rod is incredibly sensitive. I want you to hold this right here and hold it like you're going to be fighting a fish. Now point it down at me for a second. Now, you know, flounder are one of the softest biting fish there are. So tell me this. You think you're going to miss the flounder bite on that rod? You should be able to feel my voice coming through the rod. And anybody who wants to come up here and test this demo, you just put it in your hand and let somebody talk on the rod tip. This rod, you can actually feel. You should be able to feel my voice coming through the rod right now. That's the true test of an inshore rod. That if, you know, being able to feel the bite.
And that rod, what you guys just felt, I'm going to pass this around real quick, is 1/3 the weight of what you would have fished with 10 years ago. So the reel itself and the rod itself, but it's also 2/3 or 3/4 time stronger than anything that you would have fished with 10 years ago. So I want you to, as we pass stuff around, make sure it comes back, please. I see some Seminole fans in the crowd, so I know that's a possibility. But I want you to, if you're interested in something like this, I would rather have one of these than 5 of what I used to fish with 10 years ago.
And
So take a picture, all right? Take your cell phones out. If you see something you're interested in, take a picture, and then tomorrow you'll have an opportunity, or this weekend, to go to Half Hitch Tackle. We're going to give you a significant discount card at the end of the seminar that you can use. But trust me. I had the mentality, fish with cheap crap, and I'll just replace it every year. But you know what happened? Half the way into the season, I ended up losing fish because my stuff continued to break. I'd rather invest in one of those for the next 10 years as opposed to 10 of something crappy and continue to lose fish.
I'm not saying this for any reason. I love that combo, and that's what I chose to go with on my boat. And I had probably a much older gentleman. We were talking one night, and he was like, look, I've caught countless fish. I've caught so many fish. What I want to do now is I want to fight the fish. I want to get to know the fish, and I want to have fun fishing it. That's the combo that I use on my boat. But what I love about it too is I use 20-pound braid on mine, which is a little bit heavier. But the reason why, and Tim knows this a lot, I'll take that same rod out jigging for kings. So if you hook a king mackerel on, and you'll hold it in your hand, and you'll be like, no, I can't do this. And I'm sure Tim has an opinion on it, but when you watch that, it's fun.
It's all good so long as you spool the entire reel with braid, so that when we're out there bottom fishing with the same outfit and using it for slow pitch jigging, someone doesn't go, oh, I'm onto my,
Look, I'm not the only guy.
onto the backing.
I'm not the only guy who's going to go snapper fishing on that.
So the good thing about 20-pound braid, it has the diameter of 6-pound monofilament.
20 would be 4.
Okay, 4-pound monofilament. So you guys can figure out the ratio there. And I've told this in the last 2 or 3 inshore seminars. Travis and I sold a boat to a very, very, very wealthy, I mean like multi-millionaire guy that has always bass fished. But he refused to listen to me and say, listen, there's new equipment, there's new gear, there's new lines, there's new stuff. And he's like, finally, Todd, just take me, let's just go fishing together. So we sat on the front of the boat, and he pulled out his old school casting rod that had probably 12-pound Berkeley Trilene that was maybe 15 years old. And we were throwing the same exact bait, and I was literally tripling him in distance. And I was the only one that caught fish that day. And by the time I had already worked an area 10 times, he came up and he tried to cast to that same spot. And it was the same time of year. There were few fish on the flats, and they were spooky. But the point of this is invest in something nice. I mean, that's not incredible. I mean, you can take that same exact combination and add another 0 behind it all day long if you wanted to go crazy. But there's no sense in it. That's the best stuff you can buy. And with that being said, I was reintroduced to my first love, bass fishing. But not bass fishing, a bass fishing setup. Last year, Tim was gracious enough to give me a birthday gift, and it was a really nice, like a Star Segis rod like this, and a Shimano reel, okay? Low profile, just like bass fishermen use, but it had a little computer chip in it or something.
Yeah, it's a DC reel. You cannot, the one that he has is the Chronarch DC. You literally cannot backlash it.
It's real hard to throw a backlash, even with 15-pound braid. But anyhow, so it just, for me personally, I used to love throwing the topwater and working it this way, right? So now I throw a topwater with a spinner rod and I work it this way. But I always wanted to work a plug this way. And just for topwater fishing, primarily, I wanted one of these. He gave it to me, and I'm so glad I have it now, because for topwater fishing and also for suspended bait. How many people fish a Miradine, whatever you want to call it? I think by far the best bait that you could probably throw in our bay right now. And I like to work, I'm also ambidextrous, so I got a little left-handed in me. So I like to work a bait this way, and it just feels more natural to me. But feel how lightweight that is compared to what we fished with those old red Ambassador 5000 Cs back in the late 90s.
And then imagine hooking into a bull on that.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. Let's talk about bait as well. Well, before we go to bait, let's talk about line. Line's important. So there's a major difference between what's the most standard braid that you're going to find anywhere. What has everybody fished? Power Pro, right? What's the newest, hottest Power Pro?
So in Power Pro, most everybody they come in and ask for braid. They want braid. They come in and ask. They just associate it with Power Pro because they're kind of the originators of it. But they've come out in the last few years. They have some different grades of Power Pro. The original Power Pro is it's a little bit rougher. It's a 4-carrier braid, which means there's 4 lines twisted around each other. And a lot of people didn't like the raspiness of it. Well, they've come out now with what was called Super Slick, and now they have Super Slick Tooth. Instead of being 4 carriers, it's 8-carrier braid. And it is just the consistency of sewing thread. So when we went from having monofilament to braid, you added 20% casting distance. And then when we went from having regular Power Pro to Super Slick, we added 20 more %. And now we have V2, we've gained even another 20% in casting distance because it is so soft. It's literally like throwing sewing thread. And one of the things that I'm sure Todd's going to mention on the flats fishing, when we're out here fishing at the bridge, we might be fishing with a 1/4 or 3/8 ounce jig. When the flats, you got to have an itty bitty jig head that doesn't make a splash. We're probably fishing 16th and at least 8th and maybe even 16th ounce jig heads. That's hard to throw on 12-pound mono. But I can put a 16th ounce jig head and 20-pound braid, and I can easily throw any one of these rods to that furthest chair back there. So that's the main differences in the braid.
Flat fishing. So we just talked about the weight of the lead. Does everybody know what we're talking about when we're talking about throwing jigs and grubs? You got 16th, 8th, and then on up, quarter ounce and all the way up. So if you're fishing, even if you're walking around our docks here and you're in 6 foot of water and you're flipping a quarter ounce or a half ounce jig, which is pretty standard, or you're flipping a 16th ounce jig, what do you think looks more natural on the drop and when it's bouncing on the bottom? As long as you don't have windy conditions to where it's, or tidal conditions where it's pushing your line aside and you have to have that additional weight, we want to fish the lightest weight possible to give it the most natural look. Plus, the heavier the bait that you throw when you're on the flats, so when I say flats, I'm talking about waist deep water or less. Typically, our shore runs out 300 to 350 yards off of the tree line, and then it finally drops off into the center of the bay. But I want to fish in 2 foot of water, and I've got 6 inches of grass growing off the top. That gives me 18 inches of water to work with. And if I'm throwing a half ounce jig, I have to retrieve it super fast to get it to stay in that small water column. But if I'm throwing a 16th ounce jig, I can work it slow and twitch it a little bit and give it more of a natural look, and it's still sitting in that water column. So it looks a lot more natural, and it's almost scientific, but it's that important to me when I'm looking for a weighted bait. Same thing with spoons. So this is a 3/4 ounce jig or a spoon, and I only typically have half ounce or quarter ounce spoons. So if I'm in Hogtown Bayou and I'm fishing on a low tide in the winter and I've got like 8 inches of water to work with, I'm throwing a quarter ounce spoon so I can retrieve it the same speed that I can if I'm throwing this half ounce spoon in 2 foot of water.
And you said scientific, and I'm going to get really nerdy on you here.
Because you are.
These Z-Man, if you read about how these were made and what they're made out of, I think they'll last a long time. I mean, they'll last, heck, if you and I held it here, we could probably stretch it about this long. But they're naturally buoyant. So you might be able to get away with a slightly heavier jig head because these tend to float. So it might make it swim a little bit differently, but it'll keep it in that perfect little area from the way these were made. So I really like these.
Tell us about these, Tim. I've seen these online over the last couple of months. This is the first time I've seen them in person.
So this is one of the, and y'all won't be able to see this, but we'll pass it around. They're made by Live Target. These are the most realistic looking baits that I've ever seen. And whether you're trout fishing, we use them for trout, we use them for redfish, flounders. We took them, I made a giant sabiki rig, and we went out and we caught mingos and snappers and stuff on them. But just super, I mean, you'll see when we pass this around how realistic these baits are. And there again, if you want to come by the shop, we'll show you about 5 different ways that you can rig this, from a drop shot rig to a Carolina rig to just fishing it just bare naked like it is. It's something that you can use for a lot of different species. But the little live targets are great. You know, it kind of like Mark was mentioning about the Z-Man lures that they're passing some around right now. They're one of the most durable baits on the market. This bait isn't quite as durable as the Z-Man, but it is a very, very durable bait. The only species that I've encountered that will just totally destroy either one are the little blowfish in the bay.
Yep.
Don't you love blowfish?
As soon as they show up, we leave.
So if you ever throw your lure out there, whether you're trout fishing, red fishing, or flounder fishing, throw your lure out, you're bouncing, you feel this little, and you bounce it again, and you reel it in, and there's 3 little half moons gone out of it. Change that lure out and move. Because those little blowfish, once they find you, they'll eat $30 worth of baits in a few minutes. Nothing can withstand them. But other than that, trout and redfish should catch multiples on these.
Even under a cork.
So again?
Even under a cork.
Yeah. You can fish these on a cork. And with any of the lures, didn't I bring some Pro? Yeah, there's a thing of Pro Crew over there. That's something that you need on all your baits.
Everywhere. I can't tell you how many fish we've caught offshore on them too.
Okay. ProCure makes a bunch of different scents. And, they have an inshore flavor. They have crab. They have shrimp for pompano fishing. They have tuna. Comes in about 10 or 12 different flavors. But ProCure, that's something that I would add to any of my lures, whether they be soft plastics, hard baits, doesn't really matter.
You said flavors or scents. I dare one of y'all to taste that.
Well, every now and then we'll try to convince somebody that it's sunscreen.
I'll pass around a bottle that I've used for 5 years. That's how little of this stuff you use.
A lot
Pass that around and take a hit of that.
of lure manufacturers will put grooves in the actual plastic. And when I was talking to one of them earlier today, they put grooves in it specifically to hold the ProCure.
So you can take that nasty stuff, and that inshore saltwater is pretty universal because it has crab, it has shrimp, it has menhaden, it has all kind of stuff. You can put that, just take a little squirt and put it on the side of a hard bait, something like this mirror lure, and it will literally stay on there all day long.
I mean, how many times have you seen a fish follow your bait in and then at the last second kind of peel off? And that's one of those where you're like, I should have put a little bit of ProCure on it.
Oh yeah, it's to the point now that if I forget it for some reason, like I walk down to the docks here a lot, and so I wanted to give you this example. These are 3 rods that I took down to the dock on Saturday, and I went down there for 15 minutes, and I caught 3 redfish. They're all about 3 pounds, and I caught 1 on each rod. So I won't pass these around together, but you can come up here at the end and see it. And when I went down there in a golf cart, I stopped because I realized I didn't have any ProCure. And I drove back up here to get the ProCure out of my tackle box and squirted it on my 3 plugs. It literally is that important.
And Tim and I have I love fishing with gulp, but also too, I was talking about the buoyancy and the durability of those Z-Mans. It's nothing to squirt some of the ProCure into the Z-Man package, just let it soak in there before fishing.
Yeah.
And the gulps, if you start to go through gulps, everything on the planet other than humans eat gulps.
The Berkeley rep eats gulps.
Right.
They're natural.
But it's really, but you can just let it sit out there. So you're going to go through a lot more baits if you use Berkeley gulp, because everything, pinfish, pufferfish,
Catfish.
All those things eat it and they'll tear your bait up. But if you do fish something strong, like the Z-Man plastic, like Mark was saying, it's the ProCure, and it's a lot less expensive. So that $8 bottle could last you 2 years.
We do throw an awful lot of gulp on our boat, and I think it started when Kayla and I were fishing on our kayaks before I bought my boat, and I didn't feel like carrying a dozen shrimp out with me, so I just was like, I'm going to throw gulp on a jig head, because I like to set the hook. I like to feel a fish strike, and if you're fishing with the circle hook under a cork or something, you'll catch fish for sure, but I like to set the hook. And I would just bring gulp so that I wouldn't have to deal with live shrimp. And sometimes, you can agree on this, the gulp would outfish the live shrimp for us, just depending on where we were and what was happening. So I'm a huge fan in artificial lures and scent.
Well, speaking of live bait fishing, I drove all the way home tonight to go show you my latest find, which some of you guys may be familiar with. But how many people in here fish live shrimp? Nothing wrong with, nothing great about it. You fish live shrimp. So you typically walk into Half Hitch Tackle with or without one of these, right? What happens if you don't have one of these? Can you sell them one?
Absolutely.
And how much are they?
$5.99.
$6. But if you walk into Half Hitch Tackle tomorrow and you see, how many of you have ever used the Engel cooler? You have? You have one?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
It is the greatest thing on the planet Earth. I have 3 young daughters, and they don't like to fish. They like to catch. So it's live shrimp, and we go to docks where we know we can catch a ton of trout and redfish if we're fishing live bait. And it's an aerated cooler. And what's cool about it is when you go into a tackle shop and you have one of these and they fill it with this much water, what do you have to do throughout the day? You have to continuously fill that up with water, or put the baits into a flow troll and let them stay over at the side of your boat, or you have to put them in a 40-gallon live well and chase them around to just try to get a shrimp. And then once you're finally done, you have 10 left, and you pull the stopper, and they all go down in the plug, and they stink your boat up. And I cannot believe I forgot to bring it. And you forgot to bring
And
one.
I forgot to bring
And you
one.
forgot to bring yours. But it's the greatest invention of all time.
I'll use that Engel cooler on the boat instead of my live well to keep shrimp alive all day.
100%. And here's the thing. If you take this, so it's sealed like a Yeti, like an Orca, like an Engel, it's sealed. So if you're driving, if you have a Bentley and you put it in the floorboard of your Bentley and you accidentally have to slam on the brakes, the water's not sloshing out. And the cool thing about it is it's constantly aerated all day, and you never have to change the water out of it because it's insulated too, so it's cool. You never change the water out all day long. And the best part about it is it's lined with this nice little net that's the same size as the cooler. Every time you pick it up, all the shrimp come out. You just grab the shrimp out and you put it on your hook. So when you get this at the end of this night, I know this is all artificial stuff up here, go buy one of those tomorrow. There's 30 quart ones that you could use for like bigger stuff like pinfish. There's a 19 quart and then there's a 12 quart. 12 quarts, what an awesome gift to give to a 12-year-old boy that might have a beach cruiser and has access to the bay, to be able to hold it and run down to the bay.
We'll take ours down to the beach to fish too.
And the other cool thing about, the other thing that you always need to remember too is throughout the course of the year, our bay conditions change. The water's too salty, the water's too fresh, the water's too hot, there's red tide. So when you change the water out that we give you, you're putting the shrimp into a different environment. And a lot of times they can either shock your shrimp or kill your shrimp. The water that we give you at the store, we use the same product to make water at the store. We used to go down and use a pump and get water from the bay. We actually make our own water now with a product called Instant Ocean. And it's the same product they use at the Aquarium of the Americas. So the water that we give you, if you can keep them in that water all day, those shrimp are going to live 10 times as long because they're in quality water. And sometimes the bay water is great. But I tell you, tomorrow morning you go out here and you stick some shrimp in a bucket out here off this dock, they're not going to live about 30 minutes unless you put a sinker in that bucket and make it go all the way to the bottom, because that water on the surface is going to be really fresh with all the rain we've had.
A ton of fresh water.
Yeah.
So, like, you go out fishing and you have some leftover from the day with that cooler. Possibly how long will that last? This way down? You may not go back up the next day,
Right.
maybe the following day, weather or whatever.
So in our tanks at the store, the question was, how long will the shrimp last and how many days? It's not quite as long as we would have them at the store. We can keep them for probably up to a week. You in your garage is probably about 3 or 4 days, because there are other things going on in the water other than oxygen and heat. There's chemical enzymes that they're releasing. But at the store, typically 20% of the shrimp that we have on hand die overnight every night. And those end up being cups of shrimp that we sell for frozen. So 20% of ours die. So I'm going to expect that 20 to 30% of yours are going to die overnight. That's the death rate we have at the store.
And then you take those shrimp, you brine them, and freeze them, and use them to catch pompano off the beach.
But if you're going to do that, make sure you soak them in Diet Pepsi first. So I started hearing about it last year, and I didn't think much about it. And it's Diet Pepsi shrimp. I'd actually put it on our Facebook page a while back when we were talking about coming right here into pompano season. But you take shrimp, peel them, cut them up into the size pieces you want, put them in a tub, fill the tub full of Diet Pepsi, stick them in the refrigerator. Let them sit overnight, then you can take them and drain them and freeze them, or just use them the next day. It works great for pompano fishing. It does not work with Diet Coke. That's not, doesn't work with whatever. There's some ingredient, and I haven't tested it on any other species other than whiting and pompano, but there's some chemical in there that they like. Look it up. It's on YouTube. It's all over the place. It's kind of the rage in surf fishing for the last year and a half.
My trainer would tell you it's called phosphoric acid and it causes cancer. He told us that last week, didn't he? So not just joking now. I do want to try the Diet Pepsi shrimp. You have a lot of time on your hands. How far are you from retirement?
Hopefully not that far.
That's good. All right, so let's talk about some more really cool products that are new. These corks, are new. Have you seen these?
Yeah, these are awesome.
So those are called Send It. Send It corks were developed by a local fisherman here that grew up fishing our bays his entire life, and he has always had trouble with throwing popping corks for any really good distance and consistent, like a nice spiral in a football. So that's what we have here. These are called Send It popping corks, and he just went live with them about 2 years ago, introduced them at a fishing seminar here 2 years ago. How good are those?
They're excellent popping corks. They're definitely more money than your average popping cork, but one of the things that the popping cork has to work correctly, and a lot of the inexpensive popping corks, the wire piece, wouldn't think much of this, but the little wire piece that goes through it, it's too flexible. So when you go to cast, it wants to flex. Well, as soon as it flexes, well, you got somewhere between the popping cork, between 1 and 3 feet of line to your bait, because you're trying to fish suspended above the grass line. Well, if that cork is doing this, then that line wants to come back up and tangle. This popping cork won't tangle like the inexpensive $2 popping corks will. That's just one of its designs. It has its casting design where the weights have been optimized for casting distance, but just something as little as that wire being 3 times as heavy will keep you from having so many tangles. That's one of the biggest complaints I hear at the store. I don't like popping corks because it's always tangled up.
We talked about braid. Braid's nice and efficient, but is it efficient if you don't have fluorocarbon?
Correct.
So I'm going to pass this around. Tell us the difference between mono and fluorocarbon.
So, difference between monofilament and fluorocarbon. You're going to have some the braid is very visible to the fish. So we have to have something that down by the hook end that the fish can't see. Well, up until last year, I used to give a lot of the vendors a hard time at trade shows because they were selling fluorocarbon to freshwater fishermen. I'm like, you can't do that. It doesn't work in freshwater. And for anyone who doesn't know, fluorocarbon is supposed to be invisible to fish. That's how they market it. That's really not what it is. Fluorocarbon was invented for the tuna fishery. Tunas have the best eyesight of most any fish that we fish for. So they developed this leader material called fluorocarbon. Well, what makes fluorocarbon work? It's not that it's invisible, it's the same density as salt water, so it doesn't refract light. If you go to our store and you go out by the shrimp tank, you can put a piece of 20-pound monofilament in the shrimp tank, and the shrimp come up to it and they swim around it. You put a piece of 300 fluorocarbon in there, and the shrimp will run into it. Boom, 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 boom. I can see the fluorocarbon just as good as I can see the mono. Well, it's because that's what tells. It's not about invisibility. It doesn't refract light, so therefore they can't see it. Well, the manufacturers, a lot of them, were selling to the freshwater guys. Well, I tell you, if you go up here to the river, we'll catch trout 4 miles up in the river, and we'll catch bass 4 miles out into the bay. Well, when the tide's changing, the freshwater is out into the bay, and it's overriding the saltwater. So the bass will be in that top half of the water column. When you go up in the river 4 or 5 miles, well, the bottom is very salty because the salt water is more dense. Well, if you're selling it for the freshwater guys, saltwater and freshwater ain't the same density. They have now finally come to their senses and actually built a freshwater formula just in the last year. We don't actually carry the freshwater formulas at the shop right now, but we may start carrying one brand of it just to have for the guys who do go fish the ponds and stuff around here. There is some freshwater fishing.
Tim, do you have a color preference in your fluoro?
My personal preference, if I'm gonna have monofilament line, it's pink. Whether it's the line, fluorocarbon, whatever. We've all been taught, and we just have to believe scientists, red is the first color that disappears at depth. So, you know, I'm a traditionalist cobia fishing. I still fish with pink hand. But it definitely, I would have pink.
I agree. And mine started, I grew up, when I started fishing, I was in the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland. And pink seaguar was $1 less than blue seaguar for some reason. So I started fishing with pink, and I outfished my buddies, and I've never gone back since. So I agree.
How do you pronounce his last name? Oh, you're paying attention. How about that?
So I have a question. You talked about mirrodimes earlier. And I know we're coming into this huge topwater season. And mirror lure there's top dog pups, she pups. Why do we want to use different ones?
So, does everybody know that Mirror Lure makes something called a top dog? Has anybody ever seen this bait? Zaraspook Heddon years ago came out with a bait where it's a walk the dog pattern. It takes you half a day to figure out how to really do it well, and you walk the dog back and forth. Typically, you want to put a little split ring or fish loop knot at the tip of this so there's less resistance. But it's a floating bait that causes a fish, it antagonizes a fish, or it looks like an injured mullet or some kind of bait fish on top of the water. But they make a lot of different ones. They make a top dog. They make a she dog or a she pup. So you have the dog series, the junior series, which is a little smaller, and then the pup series. So there's 3 series, right? This is a junior.
I think I brought one of these.
This is a dog, and this is a pup. There is a difference between a top dog and a top pup, or a she dog and a she pup. So I'm going to try to put this up beside my microphone.
You hold the microphone?
Yeah. So this is a top dog, okay? Can y'all hear that? You hear that thick, dense knock? Hear the difference? So it's the difference between a single BB, a heavy BB, and 4 BBs. And the reason why you would want something a little more solid is if you're fishing calmer waters, it's not going to make as much racket, but just enough racket, that deep sound to bring the fish. When you're fishing rougher water and there's a little bit of breeze and possibly some hull slap, and there's just more movement in the water, you want to draw more attention to the fish. So the same bait has the same action, one's louder than the other. So that's what I have found, is that the she series of these is a lot more effective and like a little bit of a ripple than flat calm. And I'll pass these 2 around so y'all can hear them.
You know, I thought you were going to say the she series was just louder.
It is, but I'm hanging out with a scientist, so I gotta
She's looking at me like,
be thoroughly detailed.
I really think, though, that it's a matter of just throwing them both probably equal and seeing which one works on the day that you're trying to use it. Because they do sound different. And sometimes you want to draw in a bite from a long way away, and sometimes you don't want to spook that fish with too much.
And so this is also pretty cool. This is a standard. We talked about mirrodines earlier. That is a suspending bait. This one has juice all. Look at that.
I love that smell.
This is a suspending bait. A suspending bait slowly sinks and almost suspends in the middle of the water column as opposed to sinks or floats. There's no lip on it. It just suspends. And then it's up to you to work it, kind of like a dying fish. You can actually reel this and it still reels like a regular bait.
And for me, I've noticed that things like that, this time of year, I feel like you can't reel slow enough. Almost all of the fish we catch are, and I tell people on the boat every time we go out, I'm like, look, the less you move it, almost just let it kind of drift along the bottom. If you're using something a little bit heavier, it's almost not even moving it where we get the bites this time of year. And I think that'll just kind of sit in the right part of the water column, depending on where you're fishing.
Yeah, when you're standing on the docks here and it's pretty clear and you can see the trout, like you'll work a suspending bait and they'll come up out of the bottom of the water column and they'll kind of nose it. It's like they're kissing it. And I mean, I've never understood how a fish could even get within an inch of a mirror lure and not get hooked, but it happens. So they'll come up and like kiss it. And the slower that you work it and the more steady you are with the Procure, the more they're actually going to attack it. And this is the time of year where the fish are super spooky. So most of us are going to be blind casting. We're not going to be standing over a dock looking down at fish, or we're not going to be sitting up in a tower staring down at the fish. We're going to be blind casting. So slow down your retrieve. Try to fish with lighter baits.
I really think right now it's almost an impossibly slow, like you can't reel slow enough right now.
And that's tough for people
It's
like
tough
me.
it's tough for me.
It's really tough. That's why something like this is something that you would use if you have patience, unlike me.
The little trout trick, the Z-Man trout tricks, we passed a bunch of Z-Man products around earlier. The little trout trick, this is one that we want to put a little Ned head on, and this bait is designed for you to just go. Basically, you want to throw this up current, let it go to the bottom, just like you're going to fish a DOA shrimp. Bounce it, let the current move it. Bounce it, let the current move it. Bounce it, let the current move it. Anybody who ever says, I hear people come in the shop all the time and go, you sold me these DOA shrimp. We haven't talked about them yet. There's some up here on the table, but they say, can't catch anything on a DOA. The first thing is you're trying to use it like you used to having a soft bait that we're going to swim. A DOA is not designed to swim. It's designed to crawl along the bottom. This little trout trick, same thing. This is designed where if the current's running this way, I'm going to throw it up current, let it go to the bottom. I'm just going to pick it up, drop it. Pick it up and drop it. And it'll get all the way over here. I will have never touched the handle on the reel.
I mean, look at a shrimp when you have it in your live well. I mean, they're just kind of sitting on the bottom, and every now and then they'll jump and just go back to sitting on the bottom. So I tried to work mine like that.
Yep.
Yeah, I've never seen a shrimp and a mullet swim alike. Have you?
Yeah.
I can't do the DOA thing. That is like so not riveting to me.
These are cool though.
Yeah, those are really the savage
Yeah.
shrimp. Have you guys ever fished a savage shrimp? The most lifelike shrimp I have ever seen in my life. Does anybody have any questions at this point?
One thing, I have a question. Can you tell me again, I started coming to these seminars when I moved down here, and one thing you told me about these right when I moved here, I still do every single time, and it was one of the biggest takeaways I've ever had, because I can't tell you how many fish I've caught off of these, and I don't know if that's why, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So, this is something that my dad grew up fishing with, that your fathers grew up fishing with. This is the Johnson Silver Minnow spoon. That one's actually gold, but it's called the Silver Minnow. They make them in like a bronze color, they make them in black, but mostly you'll see them in gold or silver, okay? It's weedless to a point. So if you look at the bait, when it is passed around, there's a little metal weed guard that once you pull out of the pack, you bend it up to where it's just beyond the actual hook itself, the penetration point of the hook. But the problem with that is it's built to do this. The faster you reel it, what does it do? It spins. So what does spinning do to your fishing line? It spins your fishing line around. And then that causes you to get what? Wind knots, right? So you have to have a swivel on the end of your Johnson spoon. But if you go to Walmart and you buy snap swivels, what's wrong with a snap swivel? Because the reason you fish typically Johnson spoons is because you're fishing in grass or you're fishing in some kind of weed or something, right? And you need a weedless bait. But what does a snap swivel have? The snap swivel, where you snap it, the little piece of metal comes out and sticks off to the side. You guys know what I'm talking about? So that's going to catch all the grass that your hook would have normally caught, so there's no reason for you to fish a weedless bait. So instead, you want to go to half hitch tackle, and you want to buy really good split rings. So does everybody know what a split ring is? Here, show us your nipple, Mark. So, I'm just kidding. A split ring is something that you will attach to the bait itself. To the bait itself first, and then you will roll a swivel in. So something like a half ounce, I'd use a 100-pound swivel.
Yeah, because the 100-pounders are really little bitty.
You want
anymore.
small because you don't want a lot of obstruction in front of that bait. I mean, it's still a reaction bait, and the fish really doesn't know what it is when it's about to slam it. They don't know what kind of bait fish it is. But if you go from the eye of that bait to a split ring that's just round, and then you go to a swivel on top of it, now it's not easy, because what happens when you try to do your first 10? They go ding, and they shoot off across the room. But don't you guys sell a tool for that?
Split ring.
If you're going to deal with any split ring, I see people all the time try to take a hook and open it with a hook.
Bad idea.
And then next time, in the next picture you see of them, they're on Facebook, and they're at the ER, and somebody's digging that hook out of their finger. We sell little bitty split ring pliers. We have little inexpensive ones from like $5 to really nice stainless Shimano ones that are $20. They'll last forever.
And they're, especially too, if you're rocking around on a boat in the Gulf or something, changing out treble hooks on one of these, you're going to want split ring pliers.
Yeah.
But no, when you told me that, I every spoon I had, I put a split ring and barrel swivels on. But another thing too is the Procure. If you put it on the inside, yeah.
Put it on the inside of the spoon where it's not rubbing across the grass, and it
It'll
is
last a
a
lot
game changer. If you've ever felt a redfish hit one of two things, a live crab or a Johnson spoon, it's like nothing else. It's an absolute hammer.
And even not this year, but the year before, from 331 East was just full of Spanish, which I haven't seen since. But we had kids standing on the front of my power pole down, and 3 kids standing on the front throwing gold spoons and just catching Spanish on every single cast. And I'll throw spoons in the Gulf a lot too, just because, plus it's a lot, especially this time of year. It's like you said, a reaction thing. You can wait for bait on the bottom or drag something along the bottom, but sometimes I think people like me and you like to cast and reel.
Yeah. So are there any questions about like where to fish or what time and all that good stuff? What you got?
Can I ask on that gold spoon, you can put a snap ring and a barrel swivel, or a bullet swivel, I guess, regular that. Can you, as opposed to that, can you run your gold spoon, a fluoro leader, and then your barrel swivel hook to your mono?
No,
No,
doesn't work as good.
doesn't work as good.
Yeah, I've never heard that idea. The question was, rather than doing the swivel to the actual eye of the spoon, can you run it on the top of the fluorocarbon leader? I've never even heard about that.
Well, see, one of the reasons Mark mentioned a second ago, but he didn't mention it, there, especially in the springtime, there are a gajillion Spanish mackerel in the bay. And there's anywhere from nice ones to itty bitty ones. and you put that swivel up here ahead of the bait, now you hook a trout or a redfish, he's running around like this and you're fighting him, and the Spanish mackerel sees that little swivel cut in the water, and he goes, whoop, and he cuts the fish, lure, and everything off.
Or even if you have the swivel and the split ring, it gives you a little bit more metal to deal with if you do have a fish with teeth like a Spanish.
And I like, depending on what length leader I'm using, I like to try to keep braid to fluorocarbon or mono, but I like to keep my metal down at the bottom in case especially for people casting. I mean, it's hard for some people to cast a 6-foot leader, but if you have a shorter leader, it's easier for people to cast. But just to keep my knot from flying through here. Like, you know what I'm talking about? Like when your swivel's too far up and then you're limited on, or you get excited reeling that fish up next to the boat and reel that swivel into the top eye as fast as you can. Plus, I think gold spoons and a lot of metal that we throw, it's more of a reaction bite anyway. So, I know a lot of people are kind of hesitant on terminal tackle and using too much stuff like quick disconnects and things like that. But I think on a lot of that stuff, especially saltwater fish, they're so aggressive that I think I catch just as many fish as people who don't use terminal tackle. And I like being able to unclip a spoon and throw in a jig head instead of cutting and retying all the time anyway.
What state did Mark and I have something in common with when we met?
Nice throw.
Wow.
Yeah.
How old is Tim Broom? No, we won't go there.
39.
I can tell you how old I'm gonna be this year.
Not employees or friends of employees, but
Yeah.
what year are we celebrating Legendary Marines business?
17.
Yes, you can.
This is our what year in business?
Back in time. 1 million.
I think Bob got it in the
They
back.
have to be non-employees. 20th year. It's a big year. Oh, heads up.
Pretty good.
Got frisbee toss coming in the hand.
Yeah, we throw frisbees all day long. Frisbees at each other. Any other questions tonight?
I got a question for you.
Some of the best places around the bay. I've got a kick-ass guide that you can hire. His name is Mark, and he has 38 light tackle. And I would always, no matter how good you think you are at fishing, what's it like to go out with a guide that does it every single day? You will learn more in those 5 hours than you will in the next 5 months by yourself. So it's a really cool combo that he and Kayla have. Kayla's his first mate, for those of you that weren't here earlier.
Where's the
And
belt buckle?
They have so much fun. Oh my God, I forgot to say that.
She wouldn't let me.
You didn't wear it?
She wouldn't let me.
So he normally has a belt buckle. You know what Mark did this year?
That's pretty.
Mark
heavy.
and Tim together and Kayla as a massive team. Mark was awarded the Destin Fishing Rodeo Captain of the Year. How about that? And he's got this really kick butt, super Western. I told him I'd sleep in it, I'd eat in it, I'd work out in it.
I'm not saying I'm not allowed to, but I'm a little overruled sometimes with it.
So it's just really cool that this guy came in 3 years ago and decided he was going to start something new. And that's a lot of our customers. A lot of you guys are here to learn.
Well, and she's not entirely wrong. I mean, you guys, especially things like this, like we started coming to these things probably before I bought the boat. But some of the information here, and a lot of it's little stuff, and I found myself doing that a little bit tonight too. Sometimes my reaction is I don't want to tell everybody exactly what to do because I want to be able to catch fish. But if you listen close enough, there's a lot of really good information in there. When you were talking about places to fish, some, I mean, it's fishing. So, I mean, there's times where I go out all the time too and I can't catch stuff. And I mentioned earlier, like, if you look on Facebook, guys will make it seem like they're catching fish every time, like it's not always like that. And it is, I mean, I'll admit it too, it's fishing, and that's what makes it fun. So it's just a matter of spending time and going out there and striking out a lot until you, I mean, and you know what it feels like. You get that one fish that makes it all worth it, makes you want to keep doing it again.
So we'll close tonight with.
I have a question.
Yeah, yes, sir.
We talked about fishing birds and all that. When I go out fishing and I have to go out and I pull a stretch 15, but the thing, do you go on the outside edge of the bird? Or where do you, I mean, that's just, I've always tried to go out and catch the big bull under the birds with the stretch 15, stretch 25. Are you going directly through the bird path? Or are you going outside the bird path? What's the...
So have you caught them trolling?
I have.
And how have you caught them?
I was on the outside edge.
Okay. So that's.
There you go. Yep.
There
I'm
you
just
go.
wondering, but I haven't. I've also tried the inside, and I've caught one inside. So the outside edge has always seemed to be the.
I trolled through the inside a couple of times and I caught a bird. I really caught a bird. And it fought. I was like, damn, this is a big fish. And we reeled up a bird. So
We catch a lot of birds. No, yeah, we're really good at unhooking birds. But especially too, I mean, we don't troll as much, just because, I mean, I love to set the hook.
Yeah.
So we'll cast, like, we'll get close. We'll try to, if you watch long enough, you'll see those schools work in kind of a pattern. And oftentimes, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think, especially in the bay, they'll move and with 15 boats chasing a school of bulls, they'll go down, they'll pop right back up. And a lot of times they'll move in kind of a circle. And where we'll catch them, somebody will run full speed right into them, they're gone. And everybody will kind of try to chase them, but if you just sit still and wait, they'll eventually kind of come right back to where they were, whether they're feeding on the same school or not. But if we do troll, I try to get outside of them and kind of cut them off a little bit. But for the most, I feel like if you drive right through the middle of them, you just kind of spook them. If you try to drag that, I mean, those stretch 15s they're pretty big.
They're big, yeah. The stretch 15's
So we got a couple, real quick. I'm a big fan of supporting local business, right? And you have a guy here that's local. He's put in his work, and if you yourself want to learn how to fish more, or you just want to go have a blast, he's not about giving you a 10-pound reel and telling you to stick it in your gut and crank as hard as you can until you want to vomit. He does lightweight stuff, and it's super fun. And a 5-pound fish with Mark is a lot different than a 20-pound fish with some people, because they give you this massive gear that you could catch a swordfish with, and it's just not nearly as fun. It's a lot more intimate. And then with Legendary Marine in its 20th year, it is very much a local business, and we rely on, I tell people this all the time, the 17 years I've been here, I've gone through hundreds of bad relationships to find guys like Mark and guys like Tim, people that I could trust taking my family on a road trip to South Florida and back. There's so select few people like that in any industry, but specifically in this industry. And those are the people that when we sell a boat and I say, all right, here's a discount card, I want you to go outfit your boat, but I want you to take the advice of Mark, and I'm going to give you a trip with Mark so that he can take you out and so you can learn how you want to fish. That's a really good thing. And then I say this, there's a lot of national chains, Walmart and all those guys, there's a lot of national chains and things that you can buy bait from. I want to go somewhere where you have local knowledge. This dude was this big trying to fish over the arm rail at the pier, and it took him 2 or 3 years to where he could just get eye level to it, to where he could fish decently by the age of 12, right?
Yep.
So that's the guy I want to learn from. So just be loyal, keep your business local, and we would greatly appreciate that. And with that, you've got some cool stuff to give away.
I want, tonight's about trout and inshore fishing, how many people bottom fish? So anybody's going out bottom fishing, triggerfish and mingos here. Two products that we carry at the store. I know most everybody thinks about going out bottom fishing with squid for mingos and triggerfish. Fish bites and fish gum. This will at least, and in most cases, outfish squid. And it will last longer. It stays on the hook. You don't have to rebait as much. When you miss a bite, you still get another chance because it's not gone. If you haven't tried fish bites or fish gum for triggerfish and mingos, you need to come by the store and get a couple packs of these. Did I get everybody a card? Anybody I miss? Everybody got one? So that's a $28 off a $50 purchase at the shop. It's good for 30 days. Come by, see us if you have any questions. Forgot something here at the seminar. All the guys at the shop are really good. I have the best crew that I've ever had. Don't feel like you just have to come talk to me. Any of the guys at the shop, my guys are super, super good right now. Like I say, by far the best crew I've ever had.
So everybody, this is Mrs. Payton. Miss Payton, sorry, not Mrs. Payton, not yet. And Payton is our events coordinator, and she has helped out. This is her first fishing seminar, so everybody give her a round of applause. She made all this happen. She is going to pull 3 names out of the raffle cage. Be careful.
Randy Hammer. They left a little early. Bruce Glennick. Ooh, Bruce. Justin Creary. Creasy? Creasy? Russell Aston.
Holy shit.
You don't win much?
There you go.
Surprised by that one. Give a chartreuse.
Sam Perman.
I'm not giving you chartreuse. You're getting me. That's her favorite color, by the way. Yes, Tom.
Ho-
P. Okay, Tom will go with it.
Cool.
Pool.
Okay.
Tom Pool.
If it ain't chartreuse, it ain't no use.
William Strain.
All right, everybody. Thank you guys for coming out. And next month is
King mackerel.
Kingfish.
Ooh,
King mackerel. You want to come help with that one again?
I like king mackerel.
Okay. I think we have our 2 hosts. I'm not real big on the king mackerel fishing, but so Mark and Tim will be out here, maybe with the help of somebody else. But thank you guys for braving the weather tonight, and we really appreciate it. If you have Pee-wee's back at the house, you want to snag one of those pieces, take it home with you, okay? Thank you guys.